The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the DRF Wood Memorial Day webinar presented by Naira Bets. I'm your host and analyst for today, David Aragona, and I'll be joined in just a second by my fellow DRF analyst, Mike Beer. Mike and I will spend the bulk of this hour going over the stakes action on Aqueduct's Wood Memorial Day card on Saturday, but we'll also make an attempt to go over some of the undercard action earlier in the day. And if we have time at the end, we'll go over some brief takes on the Bluegrass and the Santa Anita Derby. Also, if we have time at the end of today's webinar, we'll try to get to some of your questions that you send in. And you can also access Mike and I on Twitter if we don't get to your question today. He's at DRF_beer, and I'm at Horse to Watch. So let's get right to the handicapping. Mike, how are you doing? Looking forward to Wood Memorial Day?
Yeah, of course. I always look forward to Wood Memorial. I know that it seems like people think in New York especially that spring comes maybe a little earlier than I do. I feel like they go back maybe to Gotham. This is the spring card for me. This is where I feel like everything's changing. We're in the spring meet now in New York, and this Wood Memorial Day card at Aqueduct. I mean, there's big fields. It feels like a lot of better horses are starting to come back to New York now. The racing's getting a lot better. And there are some very interesting races, I think, tomorrow, especially as far as the graded stakes go. These fields came up, I think, pretty good.
Yeah, I really agree. I mean, for me, spring really starts with the return of turf racing in New York and Wood Memorial Day. Those two things usually coincide. And I spent a lot of time on these stakes races. I didn't have really strong opinions in a lot of them, but I think they're very interesting races to discuss because I thought there are a lot of different ways you can go. And I took a peek at your picks before I went on, and I think we're going to have some disagreements, which I always like. So we'll kick things off by looking at the first stakes race on Saturday, which is race 6. It's the Grade 3 Bayshore for 3-year-olds at 7 furlongs. And we've really got 4 main contenders in this race. Where did you go?
Yeah, we do have 4 main contenders in here. That's true. It feels like the horse on the outside, Mount Travers, might have just got hustled in here because they didn't have a lot of entries. But the other 4, you know, they present a really intriguing matchup. You know, starting with Much Better, the Baffert shipper on the rail. You know, based off of his last race in the Gotham where they sent him a mile and he just ripped off a wicked pace in that race, and actually hung in pretty valiantly in the stretch to only get beaten about a length and a half. I mean, he really ran a big race last time. It almost made me feel when I first pulled the PPs that I was just going to go, well, all right, he's turning back a furlong here. There's not nearly as much speed in this race. He's going to get loose. And if he runs as well as he did last time, then he's probably just going to win. Maybe that's the way this thing will play out. I decided to go a different way just because I do have some reservations overall about how good Much Better actually is. I think his races are fine overall. I thought his win, 2-back sprinting, he had that field over a barrel, obviously, but he won that race pretty impressive. He never had to get down to serious business to beat them. Maybe he's good. Maybe this is just the right spot and he's just going to wire this field. I ultimately talked myself out of it. And I'm going to go with Mucho in this race. We'll see. I could have gone a different direction. I did like Mucho last year as a 2-year-old, though. I liked all of his races. I feel like his hopeful, where he didn't win, and maybe you could say he was a disappointment in that race. I don't know. I felt like that race wasn't run to suit him. That pace wasn't fast or competitive. He tried to sit off it, and then he couldn't get up at the end. I thought he ran fine. And I think when he came back off the layoff last time, I wasn't blown away by it. He had to work a little bit to win it, but I thought all in all, it was a really good place for him to start. And I'm just very interested to see what he turns out to be, because he looked last year like he could actually be a really good horse. And I'm hoping that that's the case. And you know what? You made him third choice on the morning line. If he's third choice, I'll probably be betting him.
Yeah, I kind of went through the same thing with Much Better. I feel like there's a chance that he's just really improved since Bob Baffert put the blinkers on. I usually don't think blinkers make that much of a difference, but he's just looked like a different horse in his last 2 races, just way more focused than he was early in his career, where he seemed to get goofy in the stretch and wouldn't finish off his races. He showed a lot of grit and determination in the stretch last time because he had a right to lose that race by 5, 6, 7 lengths, and he really battled on to only lose by a length and a half. I get that he's the main speed in this race. I mean, you see the Timeform US pace projector has him out in front with that blue bar. That's unsurprising given the small field and the fact that he just has this huge early pace rating off that Gotham performance. I kind of want to see it again out of him because even that allowance win 2 back, while it was visually impressive, it's not nearly fast enough to sort of make him the favorite in this race. And I think he likely is to be the favorite if people kind of take pace into account. So I respect him. I'm afraid of him. I just didn't want to pick him on top. I also thought it was interesting that Bob Baffert left him in New York ever since the Gotham. I assume he's stabled in John Terranova's barn, as many Bob Baffert horses are when they stay in New York. I just thought that was somewhat interesting because Bob doesn't always do that. I'm taking a shot with Mind Control in here. I don't really have any sort of clever take on him. I'm not going to try to tell you that he ran better than he actually did in the Gotham because, frankly, he got a perfect trip in the Gotham. He was on the rail throughout. He rated comfortably far off the pace and made that move to get there in mid-stretch. It kind of really looked like he was actually going to win the race, and he just got run over by High Call at the end, as everybody did. I kind of want to reward the Connections for doing the right thing by this horse and turning him back in distance to the Bayshore rather than trying the Wood Memorial, because I feel like most Connections would have just gone on to the Wood after such an encouraging performance in the Gotham. But they recognize that they really have a one-turn horse here. And I just like Mind Control. He's got this real will to win his races. Even his performance in the Jerome 2-back. I mean, he won that race by 1.5 lengths, but he was never in danger of losing that race. He just looked to be in command throughout. I liked his hopeful score last year. I just feel like he's a horse that keeps getting better, keeps taking a step forward. He's adaptable to almost any pace scenario, and I thought he'd get the right trip once again. As for Mucho, I don't really know what to do with Mucho. I wasn't thrilled with his return at Gulfstream last time. The speed figure didn't come back that fast, and just watching that race from a visual perspective, it looked like he was supposed to draw off by 3 or 4 lengths, and he just didn't really get away from that field late. And I was kind of going back and reassessing his 2-year-old form, and his hopeful was fine. I thought he ran well that day. I don't think he really ran better than Mind Control. They probably ran about equally as well as each other. That August 4th maiden race that looked so loaded at the time, I mean, there just looked to be a ton of pedigrees in there, a ton of horses that were expensive and working well, had stories about them. Looking at how horses have run back out of that race, nobody else has done anything. Mucho might have just won that race by 10 lengths because maybe it really wasn't a race of quality. And I'm just starting to wonder if Mucho maybe was given a little more credit than he should have been off a performance like that. He's a fast horse, and if he gets back to that figure he ran that day, he's a player in here. I'm just not sure that I really want him at a relatively short price, assuming that all these horses are around similar prices. And neither of us are mentioning Call Paul, but he can win this race too. I just kind of feel like his speed figures have plateaued recently, and I was a little skeptical he would take a step forward. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way about Call Paul because, you know, it just feels like it's such a short field, but it feels like most of the focus is going to be on the inside 3. And it's not like they tower over Call Paul. Maybe they're all better than him, but they don't tower over him. And, you know, he could get lost in the shuffle here a little bit. You know, he's one of those horses to me, when you see him, he's won 4 times. He was heavily favored all 4 times. But the other 2 races, the Champagne and the Nashua, he didn't run bad in those races. I don't know. He seems to me like the least likely of the 4, but it would be, you know, it wouldn't be a shocking result if he wound up winning. I guess I would just, you know, ask, you know, since we have a little bit of time anyway, you know, how do you see this race being run? I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Much Better is going to the lead from the rail. Do you think the fact that, you know, Mind Control sort of has that running style where he wants to be sort of up there, is he more compromised than Mucho in this race by having to try and keep Much Better in range? Or do you think none of that matters and it's just one of these races where Much Better is going to go to the lead and it can't really compromise either Mind Control or Mucho?
I know Victor Espinosa is typically an aggressive rider. I'll be somewhat surprised if Much Better is the kind of runoff that we saw in the Gotham. I feel like horses like that don't usually put those kind of efforts back to back. Usually they run that way and a trainer's upset about it and then they kind of reel it in next time out. I just feel like we're not going to see that same sort of speed crazy performance from Much Better. He'll be on the lead, no doubt. I just don't think he's going to be up by 3 lengths or something like that. And we'll see how fast Mind Control has to run to stay with him, because Mind Control, he is a pretty fast horse in his own right. I don't think he's going to have to work that hard to be in a stalking position. And he's kind of that grinder type that I'm not really going to be upset if he's getting that too wide trip and he's able to get the jump on Muto and call Paul.
I think he has to get that trip. I agree with you there. I just, do you think that him having to race much better first, or for most of the race anyway, if it compromises? I don't even know if that's the way the race would be run, by the way, because it's not like Mucho's a slow horse either. I don't know. There's a lot going on in this race. It's only really a race with 4 main contenders, but there's a lot going on here. So it's a very interesting race, and I'll just also be very interested to see how they bet it, because again, I'm not so sure that Much Better will be the favorite in here. Maybe he will be, and maybe he won't be. But there's a lot going on here with only 4 main contenders.
Yeah, when I was making the line for this race, you kind of have to draw some distinctions. But if I had my way, I would have just made a couple horses 2-1 and the other 2 5-2, because it just seems like it's totally wide open, and I don't really want to influence the public in any way like that. We'll move on to the Excelsior, which is running 1.1 miles for older horses, and I guess I'll begin this one. The horse that's the horse to beat is Discreet Lover, no doubt. He's kind of a funny horse because he's far and away the class of this field. His speed figures really do make him a standout. And I mean, look, he won the Jockey Club Gold Cup last year. He's not towards the top of the handicap division, but he's relatively close. And it's not as if he was totally disgraced in the Breeders' Cup Classic last year either. Even though he's going out for lower profile connections who don't really have a ton of classy horses, he just seems to show up every single time. And I'm not going to be shocked at all if he wins this race. Just my general sense of Discreet Lover is, and horses like him, when you've got these horses that are always big prices against tougher and they drop into an easier spot, do you really want to bet them as the favorite? I know I usually don't. We'll see how short he actually is. I think the public's going to be a little wary of taking him at a very short price because he is coming off that layoff. And he did win the Excelsior last year, and he's supposed to win a Grade 3 race like this. I just don't think he has to win, because there are some other interesting horses in this field, some up-and-comers. I eventually landed on Monongahela, the number 3 horse for Jason Service. I'm a little skeptical that he can actually win a race, because he does have this tendency to finish second and third and just get minor slices. But this feels like the kind of horse that Jason Service is really supposed to improve on the trainer switch. And I was a little surprised that he didn't take a bigger step forward when he made that first start off the switch at Laurel last time out. He didn't run badly that day. He was actually a little bit more interested in the early going. Monongahela, one of the things that's a vulnerability for him in some of his prior races is that he just drops way too far off the pace in the early going and leaves himself with too much ground to make up in the lane. I was kind of encouraged to see in that Campbell last time that he wasn't that far behind, and he actually was ahead of some horses on the run down the backstretch. I thought Trevor McCarthy tried to cut some corners coming into the stretch. Instead of just looping the field, he tried to come through between horses and got into a bit of a bumping match around the 8th pole. This horse did just hang on the money because he kind of did have the race won and gave it up to bonus points late. I'm worried about that character flaw, but it just feels to me like this is the kind of Michael Dubb private purchase, Jason Service trainer switch that over time, this horse is supposed to improve. And we don't always see it first time out with Jason Service, but over time, he does get these horses to run better. And Monongahela is a horse that I've always kind of been somewhat interested in when I follow the Mid-Atlantic circuit. He's actually got this really cool pedigree. He's by K1 King, who's like the last representative of this kind of sire line that's basically extinct. I just think this is a horse that has real ability, and he stepped forward recently, and he might be able to take the step forward in this race. He'll have no trouble with the 1.1 miles distance. As for the horses that are going to be up-and-comers, Nicodemus is interesting. We'll see if he gets the distance. I liked his 7 furlong allowance win last time, but that was against a weaker field. And I know Mike has a different opinion than me. The horse I don't really get in this race at all is Life's a Parlay. It's kind of weird to me that Pletcher is running this horse in this race and Vino Rosso in the Carter. I kind of would have thought they'd flip-flop those two, just given their general profiles. Life's a Parlay for me has just never run a race that really makes me interested in him. And I think he's been keeping weaker company based on his pedigree. I'm very skeptical about the 1.1 miles distance, but I've been wrong about Pletcher horses like this before. So I guess I shouldn't be shocked by anybody, because I'm just not thinking that Discreet Lover has to win this race.
Right. Yeah. So I think we have a lot of similar opinions here. First of all, Discreet Lover, to me, he's just a horse that you use in the multi-race wagers and you don't bet him to win. Maybe he'll just beat this field because, you know, at the end of the day, it's just not that strong. And he actually is a good horse. I mean, you know, it's in, you know, you see him win the Jockey Club Gold Cup and pay $90 and go off at all these big prices in these races. But he actually acquits himself really well in some tough spots. And he's the horse to beat in here, but I'm not betting him to win. You know, everything that you said about Monongahela, I agree with as far as, you know, maybe service will improve him. Maybe he already did improve him. In fact, he ran fine last time, but it's not a race he had any excuse to lose. And that's just kind of him. You know, will service get him to now take a really big step forward? I suppose it's possible. But, you know, I'm not going to hold my breath. He's going to be a short price in this race. And he is what he is. He doesn't have any speed. He'll be at the back of the field. He'll try and outclose Discreet Lover, I guess. And maybe he'll do it. I don't know. I could use him, but I don't love him. And after that, you know, there's just a bunch of horses in here who, you know, you're probably not able to make a really strong case for. Horses like Holiday Bonus. I happen to be a Hit It Once More fan. I don't know if he's running here or at Parks. But if he doesn't make the lead in his races, he can't win. So that, you know, bothers me about him. But if he does get to the front in this race, he's a dangerous horse. I just don't know if he's running here. So to me, it sort of, you know, brought me down to either Nicodemus, who I like. I'm a fan of his. I like it when Linda Rice gets these horses going the right way and then steps them up in class like she's doing here. And I like all of his races, and I think it's worth pointing out that his last 3 starts, all 3 of them for Linda Rice, have been on sloppy tracks. And listen, he might catch a wet track again tomorrow, but I'm very interested to see what happens when he gets on fast dirt, because I think he might really like a fast track. I just don't know how far he wants to go. I like him a lot as a horse. He is not bred to really stretch out on the dam side. And I know that he ran okay in the Curlin last year at this distance, but I don't know that I really feel like he wants to go this far. He's got a great post. I'm using him. I'm a fan of his. And then we'll get to Life's a Parlay, who I wound up putting on top. And I put him on top only for one real reason. I agree with you about, you know, the Pletcher thing. You know, I feel like Todd's horses are running a lot better now than they were for a while in New York. I'm concerned about how far he wants to go. I'm actually not sure how good he is, but I do think he's going to get a really good trip in this race where 2 of the main contenders are complete plotters and he is not. And I just want to say 2 things about his 2 most recent races. The Gio Ponte that was rained off the turf and was a 3-horse field was a despicable loss. It was also a despicable ride that he got in that race. For some reason, conceding the lead on a walking pace. It was absolutely ridiculous. Todd laid him off after that. And yeah, it was a 2-turn race, an allowance race at Oaklawn last time, going a mile. Did he run great? No, but he took pressure on the lead in that race every step of the way. And I like the way that he finally showed that he was going to fight, because in his other races, he didn't really look like he was going to do that. He took pressure up the backstretch and he raced that horse off. He took on a challenger all the way around the 2nd turn and he raced that horse off. And then he had the runner-up come for him in the stretch and looked like he was going to go by, and he raced that horse off. So I really think he did a lot more last time than just get to the front and win with an 86 buyer. I think he ran a lot better than it may look on paper. And if he gets a good trip in this race, and he's a good price, you made him 4-1 on the line. If he's 4-1, I'm probably not betting him. But I thought there was a chance that he could drift up to a better price than that. And if he does, I'll take a shot with him, because there's nobody else in this race that I really like.
Yeah, you make a good point about the pace, which I kind of didn't mention. You do have to point out with Hit It Once More that he's ridden by a rider who doesn't ride in a lot of big stakes races. And I could see John Velasquez just kind of getting aggressive from the outside post position, even if Hit It Once More does participate, and just kind of securing the early lead from him. And we've seen it happen many times where John Velasquez is just kind of more aggressive than the other riders and is able to back down the pace a little bit. I could see that scenario working in Life's a Parlay's favor. I'm just a little biased because I've never been a big fan of this horse, and right. I kind of haven't been surprised that he hasn't really stepped up and run a faster race. But you make valid points about him, and Todd Pletcher's horses have been running better recently. I have the same concerns that you have about Nicodemus, about the distance preferences. I do think he's sort of more of a 1-turn mile horse, And
Yeah.
given his pedigree, I'm not really sure the 2-turn mile and an eighth is going to be right for him. And my hope with Monongahela is just that Jason Service injects more speed into him, because if the race does develop with absolutely no pace, that's going to really work against him more than anybody else.
Right.
So I think that's everything we had to say about the Excelsior. We'll move on to the Gazelle, and Mike, I'll let you start with this one. I found this race to be really tough. There are a ton of contenders, and they all look pretty evenly matched.
Yeah, it's true. I really struggled with this race. As a matter of fact, I really tried to make a case for everyone, and I was going through this race the other night. It was just, I didn't know who to pick. I guess the real problem with it too is, aside from Espresso Shot, who just hasn't run a bad race on dirt yet, everybody else sort of comes in with questions. Either they were really disappointing in a recent start, or they just had everything go their way in a recent start. I thought it was really tough, starting with Espresso Shot. I don't really have a knock on her. Am I a little concerned about her stretching out for this race? I am. I mean, I guess I feel like she'll be okay with the mile and eighth, but I'm not sure about it. I do like all three of her dirt races, or all four of her dirt races. She's improved in every one. She ran perfectly fine to me last time. If you want to make the argument that Oxy Lady would have won with a clean trip, I won't argue. But this horse ran fine last time. I'm not against her. I just sort of looked at it and thought, Positive Spirit, she was dreadful in the Rachel Alexandra. I don't know why. She was very antsy in the gate before the race. After that, I don't know what her excuse could possibly be. She was just terrible in there. But her other races to me are all good. Am I super comfortable just throwing her last race out and saying, she'll run better in this race? I'm not super comfortable doing that, but I did like all of her races as a 2-year-old. Especially, I liked her 2-turn races. She didn't win the first 2-turn route at Keeneland in her second start, but she ran really well that day. And she ran the best race that day, in fact. And then she came here for the Demoiselle, and she just crushed the field. I know it wasn't a good field, but she just crushed that field. So I decided ultimately to give her another chance. And I did that mostly because the only other 2 horses that I considered, Always Shopping, who, she could win. I think distance is really good for her, and she ran fine in the Bisonda last time. But she got such a perfect trip in the Bisonda and ran a 76 buyer. Just sitting on a gold rail the entire way, in a race where Philly Joel, who, yes, was also on the race, Philly Joel had to be used from an outside post just to get to the front. And this horse just sat right behind her and then came off the rail and ran her over in the stretch. And it's just, I didn't want to take her off of that race. I know that she can win. I'll use her. I want somebody else. And the other horse that I tried to talk myself into, and I want to hear what you have to say about the 6 Proud Emma. I don't know who you picked in this race. I thought for a long time when I was going through the race that I was going to pick her on top, because I liked her the first 2 races where she stretched out. They weren't fast races, but she won them, pretty convincingly. I liked the way she looked doing it. She caught a sloppy track after that and didn't run as great. And then last time had this, huge meltdown, and she just came running from the back and ran it down. But with a new top figure and how they stretch her out again, I almost put her on top. I chickened out at the end, and I went to Positive Spirit. We'll see what happens. So, the 3 outside horses for me, I'm not against the favorite. I just wanted to pick somebody else, and I went back to Positive Spirit.
Yeah, I'll briefly touch upon all the horses you just mentioned and give my thoughts on them, because you actually didn't mention the horse that I ended up picking in this race. Espresso Shot, I agree with what you're saying. She's run well in all of her races, and I'm not going to be surprised if she wins this. Well, I'll say this. What would surprise me is if she improves and runs like an 85 buyer and wins this race easily. That would surprise me. If everybody runs below their form and she wins with like a 75 buyer, that's not going to surprise me, because I find it hard to believe that Espresso Shot is going to improve going a mile and an eighth. And some people might think that she has to improve, because at some point, these 3-year-old fillies have to start running faster races, because all of these preps have been so slow. Somebody's got to step up at some point. I'm just skeptical that it's going to be her, because if you watch her races, she just strikes me as one of these these dirt horses who's got more of a turfy action, who kind of makes this burst of speed like a turf horse on the dirt, and she'll get to the front and just kind of get the mile because she can hang on that last eighth after she's made her move. And I'm just not sure that same running style is going to work going a mile on an eighth. So I'll use her. She deserves to be the favorite for sure. I just am a little bit skeptical that we're going to see her show any kind of improvement in this race. Positive Spirit was a really tough call for me. I almost picked her. I ended up putting her second in this race. If she runs the Demoiselle back, there's no question she's going to win. I just don't like when horses like her perform so poorly and the connections offer no excuse. The connections just threw their hands up and said, we don't know what happened. And that's concerning to me. And if you watch her races from last year again, she's got this really weird action to her stride, where if you watch the head on, it's actually very ugly because she crosses her right leg over her left leg. It's this really bizarre thing, and it looks like she's like almost like got a broken leg when she's doing it. I just wonder if horses like that have a funny way of moving, if eventually that's going to catch up to them. And her stride completely broke at the top of the stretch on the Rachel Alexandra last time. She's got this really steady action way of going that we saw all through last year. She just was not finishing that race whatsoever in the Rachel Alexandra. And I just wonder if she can completely turn things around in the span of under a couple of months. She's the main speed in this race. I respect the pace projector. I think it's going to be accurate. I just couldn't put her on top because I have those doubts. Always Shopping does very little for me. I'll use her somewhere, but I agree with you. She's just not that fast, and she got a great trip last time. I agree with you about Proud Emma. I really considered putting her on top. I ended up leaving her out completely because it's just that kind of race. They're also evenly matched. I think what's really going to be important with her is how they ride her, because she does have this, as the pace projector indicates, she does have the speed to be up close early, but she was so successful last time when they just took her way off the pace in a sprint and she closed that field down. Her late kick in her 2 turn races is not quite as impressive as what she showed going the 7 furlongs last time. And even though she's bred to go longer, I just feel like maybe she's more of a 1 turn horse. I'm not sure about that because she's changed barns so many times and we've seen so little of her in top class company that I'm not 100% convinced of that opinion. I just am kind of leaning in that direction that she might have trouble going this distance. And since I'm not enthusiastic about any of those short priced horses, I landed on Off Topic. I've never been Off Topic's biggest fan, but as I started to go through all of her races again, I said to myself, is she really that much slower than the top contenders? And if I had to pick out one horse that I thought still had some upside, it would probably be her, because she has had some trips in her races. She was extremely wide in that October 25th race when she lost by a half length to Always Shopping. She just got a ridiculous trip on December 27th at Gulfstream Park. That was a really tough day to make speed figures. The buyer numbers were very low. I think Craig gave it a higher time form US figure, when I think the time form US numbers are a little bit more accurate in my estimation. And then last time out, she was no match for Motion Emotion at Oaklawn Park. And I actually think that filly Motion Emotion is pretty good. She ran a really nice race in the Fantasy. And Todd Pletcher, I was reading his pre-race quotes, and he hinted that they might be very aggressive with Off Topic. And I would like that for this horse in this race because she wants every part of the mile on eighth, in my opinion. And I could see her just outstaying this field. She's this really big filly who just seems like she's needed time to grow into that frame. And I'm not going to be shocked if she takes a speed figure step forward of 5 or 10 points here. And to me, that's more than good enough to beat this field.
Oh yeah, improvement like that, you're 100% right. Listen, it's that kind of race. Questions about the shorter prices, nobody's that fast anyway. I actually had a thing for Off Topic early in her career, and she just kind of lost me, but everything you're saying about her is true and makes sense. And if she can, just sort of get herself into the race more early in this spot, it's certainly not a race where you're afraid of anybody else. I can't argue with anything that you said about her, especially with her last race. That horse that beat her last time that horse looks like she's pretty good.
Yeah, I'll just mention the only concern I have about that plan that Todd Pletcher seems to have hatched is that she has a bad habit of breaking slowly in her races. So yeah. I'm not sure how that's going to work out if they want to show speed with her, because she does often break about a length slowly. Sure. I just feel like in a race that's going to feature a slow pace like this with a short field, maybe that won't matter that much, or at least I'm hoping that's the case. Moving on to the Grade 1 Carter, which is the only Grade 1 on this Aqueduct Saturday card. There's a big favorite in this race, and it's the number 8 World of Trouble. And I don't know about you, Mike, but I am not trying to beat him. To me, I know he's run some faster speed figures, or at least one faster speed figure on the turf. I actually like him more as a dirt horse. I love what I've seen out of him in his dirt races. I thought he ran exceptionally well in that Woody Stevens last summer. He hasn't faced top company like that on dirt since that race, but he's just run nothing but really fast speed figures ever since then. Looking at the pace projector for this race, I don't think he's going to have any trouble making the lead over Skylar Scramjet, who I doubt they would want to get into an early tussle with this horse. And I just think World of Trouble has found the right spot to get his Grade 1 victory. I don't have anything too clever to say about this race. I'm not really looking forward to doing anything with this race other than kind of using it as one of the legs in a multi-race sequence. As for the other horses in here, I guess Vino Rosso can do okay. I'm very skeptical that he's going to be at his best going 7 furlongs. I know the version of Vino Rosso that we saw come back in the Stymie last time was a different horse than we had seen throughout the summer last year, because he had been very sluggish in his races like the Jim Dandy and the Travers, just kind of losing contact with fields early. And he was right up on a faster pace in the Stymie last time. That said, he still doesn't have the kind of speed to go with the faster horses in this race, especially not World of Trouble. Maybe he's going to be okay closing from off the pace once again. I don't know. I'm not sure. It's interesting to me that Todd Pletcher is making this move. I know that this is an important race for becoming a sire. So if they're hoping this is an easy spot to get a Grade 1, perhaps, I'm a little skeptical of that plan, but maybe that's the thinking. Identity Politics is a horse that I was interested in off his Malibu, but I was a little disappointed with his race at Gulfstream last time. I thought he really should have won that race because he got a perfect setup and just couldn't quite capitalize. And the only other horse I would consider is Honor Up. I think Honor Up makes a lot of sense behind in the Exact and Trifecta. He's just been in really good form lately for Michelle Nevin, and I don't mind the turn back to 7 furlongs at all with him. I think 7 furlongs is actually a perfect distance for him. So I'll probably use him underneath World of Trouble, but for me, this race is all about World of Trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even really going to add too much. I'm not betting against World of Trouble. I agree with you that he's obviously very good on turf. I like him more as a dirt horse. When I looked at the race, I thought I won't try and beat him. I will try and beat Vino Rosso underneath. Listen, maybe this is what he is now, and maybe he'll run really well in here, but I don't know. He doesn't do a lot for me in this race, and he ran fine in the Stymie. But and it was interesting to see him show speed. But those are the races. That Pletcher he brings these horses back off the layoffs, going a mile or more, and they all win. And he certainly did. I wasn't blown away by his performance. So if I bet the race straight up, it's World of Trouble and not using Vino Rosso underneath. Yes to Honor Up, who, I've always liked, and Michelle Nevin's gotten the best out of him. And, I could use Skylar Scramjet underneath. I know he hasn't won in a long time, and he's found a way not to win all 3 of his starts as he returned from a layoff. I think he's run well in all 3 of those starts, and has been a little bit unlucky not to have at least one win. And, last time it just didn't work out for him in the Tom Fool. I mean, he just broke so sharply from the gate. Dylan Davis, he had no choice. He had to go. He got hooked up on a pace in there, and it cost him at the end. I don't think it's going to happen in here. Even if he breaks like that, he's not going to race World of Trouble early. Maybe he can sit second this time. And he's got some good races. I've not given up on him. I think he's a good horse. So my plan is to just use World of Trouble in the multis, and if I play it straight up, try to beat Vino Rosso.
Are you concerned at all about the 7 furlongs for Skylar Scramjet? Because I know when he was coming into the Carter last year, that was the big question for him, and he hasn't really done it yet at the 7 furlongs.
Yeah, it's something to consider. I mean, I don't really feel like, he's run 7 furlongs a few times. One of them you can just totally throw out because it was when he wasn't in Michelle Nevin's barn, and whatever reason, those 3 starts when he was for that other trainer were just awful. And then the other 2, listen, I thought he ran great in the toboggan. He didn't win the toboggan. I thought he ran great in that race. And then he ran in this race last year. He wasn't beating Army Mule last year. He did not run poorly to be 4th. So I'm not there yet where I feel like he's not a 7 furlong horse. Maybe that's the case with him, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah, I was of two minds on him. I wasn't really sure which way to go. I've kind of felt like the shorter distances are better for him, but I totally hear what you're saying about his last couple of races being better than they seem. I don't really have any argument with that. Uh, Ultimately, I just thought of the horses that were more likely to pick up the pieces. It would be a closer in this race behind World of Trouble, but we'll see
Yeah.
how it plays out. I don't want to spend too much time on it because World of Trouble, I think, for both of us is just way the horse to beat.
Yeah.
Moving on to the Wood Memorial, the feature event on Saturday, and this is a race that I think we can spend some time on because there's a lot going on in here, and there are a number of horses that are going to be among the shorter prices, and I think there are positives and negatives to all of them. I'm forgetting. Do I start with this one? I'll just start with this one.
Yeah, go ahead. You can go.
Yeah. So Tacitus is going to be the favorite, I would assume, off his Tampa Bay Derby score. I feel like he's going to improve in this race. We'll see how much he improves. You would assume that second off the layoff, he's going to take a step forward for Belmont. He's going to have to improve to win this race because other horses have just run faster speed figures. He worked out a very good trip at that Tampa Bay Derby. Jose Ortiz did everything right from the outside post position, getting him to the rail for the second turn and saving ground. This horse really came through on the inside gamely. I thought that race was sort of falling apart a little bit at the end, and his late run was kind of an optical illusion, given that so many horses were coming to a stop at the end of that race. But he still ran the figure that he ran, and I think he makes a ton of sense. I just am not in love with the idea of betting him as the favorite. I'll use him defensively, but I wanted to go in a different direction. I'm very scared of Tax in this race. I think Tax, of the main three, could kind of be the forgotten horse because so much has transpired since he won that Withers back in early February. And it just feels like nobody is talking about this horse anymore. He actually has run really fast in his races. I know that the Remsen is a race that many people are often skeptical of producing a top Derby contender, but we saw Bourbon War come back out of that race and run just fine in his Derby preps. And I know Maximus Mischief and Network Effect have since gone to the sidelines, but I don't want to take that into consideration too much. And the Withers is a weird race to analyze because, like Tacitus, Tax got a perfect trip to win that race. He earned a career best speed figure, a speed figure that is among the highest we've seen in any of the preps. And I know Not That Brady and Our Brain Trust came back to run so poorly in their subsequent starts. I think you can say that there are some reasons for that. And I never want to take into account too much when horses are just kind of eased in races, as Not That Brady was in the Gotham and Our Brain Trust. I think he was last in the second division of the Rebels. So look, that's not an indictment of the Withers form. That just suggests that those two horses went the wrong way after the Withers. More instructive to me is to look at the fourth and fifth place finishers, Sir Winston and Admire, who both came back in the Tampa Bay Derby and validated the Withers speed figure. I'm not going to be shocked if Tax is actually that good. I really respect the job that Danny Gargan does. He's drawn a perfect post position down inside. I think he's going to get another really good trip, and I don't have any questions about him getting the mile and an eighth. So Tax, for me, is kind of the horse to beat in my estimation, and I don't think he's going to be the shortest price. So maybe I should have picked him on top. I can make a strong case for him. I ended up going for Final Jeopardy in this race. This is a horse that I've liked. I really liked his maiden win. I know it was going 6 furlongs back in December against a suspect field, but if you watch that race, I mean, he just ran over the top of that field like he was in a completely different race from the rest of them. I think if you look at Trackus numbers, he ran his final quarter almost a full 2 seconds faster than anybody else in that race, and really suggesting that he's a horse that eventually would want to stretch out. And that proved to be the case last time when they put him in that allowance race. When horses like him that are closing sprinters stretch out, what I want to see is them show more early speed. And that's exactly what Final Jeopardy did. He kind of dragged Red Ortiz right up into the race soon after the start. He was just kind of waiting for his cue coming to the top of the stretch. And as soon as Ortiz asked him, he just took off from that field. He got a little bit green, kind of drifting out at the 8th pole, but he has a really powerful finishing kick on him. And I get the sense that he is more than a one-turn horse. Just looking at his pedigree, he's by Street Sense. This is the female family of horses like Midshipman and Fast Cookie, who produced Frosted. I just feel like there's enough stamina breeding here for this horse to get the mile and an eighth. And I'm not going to put anything past Jason Service. I'm not going to be surprised if he has a really big day on Saturday, because I think he's live in a number of these races. And I just have liked this horse in the visual sense. I know the speed figures are a little bit slow, and I usually like to pay more attention to that. I just think he's the horse that's moving in the right direction in this race, and he's going to work out the right kind of trip. So if I can get 6 or 8 to 1 on Final Jeopardy, he's the horse that I want to bet in this Wood Memorial.
Yeah, listen, I like Final Jeopardy from a lot of different directions. I really like his pedigree, and like you, I was really taken with his debut. I mean, he ran a huge race first time out, and I actually don't think he ran poorly at all in the Limehouse. I know he didn't win. I know he was a really short price that day. I didn't think he ran poorly at all when finishing third in that spot. He improved stretching out. That's not surprising. If I was nitpicking, and there's no need to nitpick, he's going to be 8 to 1 in this race. But if I was, he got a really soft trip in that race, I thought. I hear what you're saying. He showed more speed. That's a bonus. He still finished. They were walking, right? That was a very easy looking pace to me, and he just sat right there against some horses who aren't that good. We'll see. If he's 8 to 1, I'm not arguing. Service off of a fast race. Service, people can't stop talking about him now. The way they talk about Service, you think he wins 100% of his races, but he doesn't. I feel like he might come down off that price, but if he doesn't, I'm not arguing with this horse. I want to see it again from him. But the reason that I'm not, totally against him is because the 4 main players in this race are drawn in post 1 through 4. And while I agree with you about Tax, I don't love him, but I'm not against him in this race. He's a horse to me that you have to use, especially if he's not the favorite. Tacitus, I won't add anything to what you said about him. He's got the pedigree. He's supposed to get better with more distance. He's only made 3 starts. He's run well in all of them. He just won a grade 2. He's the horse to beat in here. Do I think you want to take a short price on him? No, I don't think that you do. But I don't see how you play the race seriously and don't use him anywhere. The other 2 horses that are drawn inside, Hoffa's Union and Heikel, who I guess, either one of them could take some money. And, I know that some people like them. I just don't like either one of them. Hoffa's Union could still be anything. He ran a 95 first time out. He won by the length of the stretch. I don't know. I want to see it again. We'll see what happens with him. I wasn't as taken with his debut as some others were, and I just don't want Heikel stretching out. I just went to outshine. He's got post 10 for Pletcher. This is a horse who I think has run well basically in all of his starts, especially since he's come back off the layoff. I liked his win at Gulfstream, first time back. I think if you're looking at the Tampa Bay Derby and you like Tacitus as the favorite, then you have to like this horse, because I'm not so sure he didn't run better. Am I convinced he's a top 3-year-old? No. Am I convinced that he gets better as the distances get longer? No. But I think he'll be a fair price in this race, where I just, I don't really like anybody else. The 4 horses that we talked about down inside, I like the 1 and the 2. I hate the 3 and the 4. The other 7 horses in this race, of the other 7, 5 of them do absolutely nothing for me. The horse that you picked on top, I could take if he stays around his morning line. I'll just take Outshine. And, again, Johnny V should have this horse forward from the start. Maybe he lands a trip, and he should be a better price than the other horses.
Yeah, for me, Outshine was the horse that I had most difficulty making a decisive call on, because I see what you're saying, and I really could have gone either way. The trip handicapper in me totally agrees with you that he might have run the better race than Tacitus in the Tampa Bay Derby, and based on that, he is the horse you're supposed to take out of that race. But looking at this race, I just wonder what kind of trip he's going to get, because it's not easy to break from the 10 post going a mile and an eighth at Aqueduct, where they head right into that clubhouse turn. And there are speed horses to his inside. I mean, I can't imagine they're going to rate over deliver his stablemate, who's got Kendrick Carmouche on board, and he's coming out of 2 sprint races. Hoffa's Union, I don't know if he's fast enough to make the lead. The pace projector suggests that he is, even though he's at a pretty moderate pace in that debut at Laurel. But since he's drawn inside all the other speed, I think they've got to be aggressive with him. And I have no idea what Not That Brady is doing in this race if they're not trying to make the lead with him, because he proved last time in the Gotham that he has no business rating behind horses. So they've got to go with him. And I just wonder what kind of trip Outshine is going to pull. I know that he can sit off the pace a little bit, and maybe he'll be 3 lengths off the pace and make that run into it. I just feel like he's going to have to be used a little bit too aggressively for my liking, and I have some concerns about him getting the distance because I just do want to mention his pedigree. He's a full sibling to Bowie, who was a turf sprinter, and there's really turf sprint pedigree on the dam side. I know he's up by Malibu Moon at an Unbridled Song Dam, and all that is enough to get him the distance. Given what I've seen out of him, I'm a little bit doubtful about him getting the distance, and I'm just doubtful about the trip. I respect what you're saying, and I think he is fast enough to win this race. I just wasn't sure. I could have gone either way.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that way about a lot of horses in this race. And again, when you start looking at how the race will likely be bet, I just sort of feel like he might be the one who's, personally, I won't be surprised if the service horse is actually a shorter price than him. We'll see how that all plays out. But, I can't take the 1 and the 2 to me they seem like the right horses, but I also feel like, they don't have to win at short prices. And outside of that, it was really only 2 horses for me, either Service or Fletcher, and I wound up taking Fletcher.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I wasn't that interested in Hoffa's Union. I'm just doubtful he's going to get the same situation that he encountered at Laurel and Heikal. It's just rare to see closing sprinters like him really be best going the 2-turn mile and length distance. So I was going to bet against those horses. And I think we've covered all the main contenders in the Wood Memorial. So we'll turn back a little bit to the beginning of the day. And I don't know if there are any races that you really wanted to discuss from the undercard at Aqueduct. One of the races that I thought was a little bit interesting was the 1 turf race. We'll see if we actually are on the turf. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this race because we might be off. But the 5th race I thought was totally wide open. I actually don't know if I looked where you went in here. Did you have an opinion in this race?
The 5th race, yeah, we'll see if it stays on. Oh, this is a really tough race. Of course, when I started going through it, I immediately wanted to pick Indebted on top because he's one of my favorite horses of all time. I think he's lost a step in the last year or so. I don't think he ran as poorly as it looks in some of his races last year. He didn't win a race. He went 0 for 8 last year, but he was rained off 3 times. They tried 1.5 miles. They tried all kinds of different things with him. And he actually ran okay in some of those races. I immediately wanted to take him. I'll still use him. But I have a big opinion in this race. I didn't accept that I don't like Sycamore Lane that much. I know that he can win. I narrowed it down to Wicked Freud off the service claim. There's really not that much need to go any further than that. He's been a good horse for a long time. Forget about the dirt experiment the last time you saw him. Service, has an unbelievable record with turf horses off the claim, and Slim Shady, who's back, where he needs to be. They're dropping him. He's another horse who got on a huge run for Service between the summer 2017 and the summer 2018. Just ran one really good race after another. He hasn't really held that form since Maker took him, but Maker ran him in some really tough spots. This is back where this horse belongs. I didn't really have anything clever to say about this race.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting race because there are so many ways to go. And I was kind of skeptical of a lot of the short prices. Wicked Freud is obviously dangerous for Service, but I wasn't thrilled with a lot of the other horses that are going to get bet in this race. I agree about Sycamore Lane. I think he's kind of gone the wrong way. Applicator is one that has to take some support on the outside for Brad Cox, but he's hard for me to bet off his last race when he just showed none of the early speed that he once had, and now they're dropping him down to the bottom. I thought that horse was very precarious. Slim Shady's a likable horse. I'm not going to be shocked if he wins this race. I think he's seen better days, but he's one that I would use of the shorter prices. There are just 2 long shots I want to mention who I think are interesting. One of them is Shamcat, and Shamcat's sort of an up or down horse. He's all over the place with his form, but he is a better turf horse. And I think his last dirt race at least signals that he's getting back into better form. And when I look through this entire race, there are so few horses that want to be forwardly placed. And especially if Applicator doesn't have the early speed that he once had, the front end on this race could be totally wide open and there for the taking. And CJ Hernandez has been aggressive with some horses as he was with this horse last time. And I could see Shamcat winding up on the lead. And I think that would make him dangerous because he handles softer turf if we do get some rain. And he's just a horse that is good enough to beat this field at this level, especially if some are going in the wrong direction. So I'm going to pick Shamcat on top, and I think I'll get a price on him. And the other horse I just want to quickly mention that has a shot in this race is the number 4 Glencairn, who, if you look at his turf races, I know they were a while ago, or one of them wasn't that long ago, actually. They're better than his races on dirt, for sure. And
Yeah.
even his races on synth, his turf races are better. He's off the claim for Gary Gullo. His dirt races recently at Aqueduct actually weren't even that bad. He's shown some signs of life. I don't know if he's going to get paced to close into or anything like that. He's just a horse that's probably going to get ignored in this race, who has a shot, because I think this race is open to about 7 or 8 different horses. And those two might be the biggest prices of the horses that I'm considering.
Yeah, I've actually, it's interesting that you mentioned Glencairn too, because he's a horse who, he's been entered on dirt a couple of times since Gullo claimed him. He scratched him both times, but I was willing to bet on him in both of the dirt races that Gullo entered him in, because I don't think he's run as poorly as it looks in his last 2 races. And it's just such a huge trainer change for Gullo to be taking this horse. But, you know, obviously Gary decided not to run him on dirt, and now he's going to run him on turf. And as you say, I mean, his synth and turf form, you know, just sort of towers over his dirt form.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Before we move on from the Aqueduct card, the one other race I'd want to mention, I don't know if you have like a best bet early in the day, but I thought the 11th race is one we could just spend a second on, because it's closing out the day. It's closing out the late pick 4, pick 5 sequences, pick 6. And there is a lot going on in this race. There are many contenders. I thought this was one of the more interesting handicapping races on the card. Did you have an opinion in this race? Where did you go?
Yeah, I thought this race was, you know, really tough. I wound up, listen, it's one of those, you know, it's so funny because it's an open, you know, 1X allowance race with a, you know, a bunch of horses who, you know, have won a lot of races, but not necessarily these kinds of races. You know, they win in the, you know, optional claiming or New York bred conditions. So they remain eligible here, but they all run fast races. So it's just, you know, wide open. I sided with, and I still don't know if it's the right way to go, but I sided with the more lightly raced horses in here. It's hard for them to beat, you know, the experienced, hard knocking horses who have won a lot of races. It's really difficult for them. But it's the way that I went in this race. You know, horses like Sam and Jacks for Chad Brown, who I actually feel like has run well in his starts. He's only run twice. He didn't beat anything first time out, but I liked the way that he did it, and I thought he ran well on a sloppy track last time. So I went to him, but I would want a price on him if I took him. But also, you know, to me, horses like House Limit, another one who caught a sloppy track last time. He's a horse I'm interested in. Another horse who beat a terrible field when he broke his maiden, but did it the way that you wanted him to do it. I liked him. I'm actually interested in Clement's horse Seafoam, the New York bred, who's turning back too. I know that he won a couple of 2-turn routes last year, but I like that horse going in 1-turn races, and I think he still has some upside as well. Where did you go?
Yeah, I kind of went the other direction. It's funny you phrased it that way. I went against the lightly raced horses. Actually, the 3 horses that I put in my first 3 spots, actually all 4 of my first top picks are horses that have had more experience. I went for Expert, who is going to be one of the shorter prices, I would think. He's probably the 2nd or 3rd choice in this race. I thought his last race at Aqueduct in that starter allowance was really strong. I know he got a good trip, just kind of sitting behind horses on the rail and then exploding through in the stretch, but he really ran that day. He was flying across the wire, just opening up on that field. And we've seen Potomac come back and run faster in his subsequent start. If you look really at all of his last 3 races, the fields that he's faced, the horses that he's beaten have all come back and improved. That happened 2 back with Royal Albert Hall and Eagle Pass. It happened 3 back with California Night and Rogue Nation. His form is rock solid. And even though he's stepping up in class, I feel like it's not as big of a step up as it might seem, because that field he faced last time may have been a bit better than it seems. It's a really salty spot, and Linda Rice, I always respect when she's moving horses up like this. I know there's really no other place to go with a horse that's been winning. I just think that this horse has taken a step forward off the claim and can take advantage of a field of horses that, while they have more upside, I'm just not sure that there's a ton of real quality. I don't think we're going to be seeing any of these horses moving on to stakes eventually. I don't think it's that kind of non-winners one allowance race. So I wasn't that afraid to take a shot with a horse like Expert who's coming out of claiming races. I put Dark and Cloudy second. I have nothing clever to say about him. I just think he's dangerous. Vincento, I think, is also dangerous, getting back into Rudy's barn. He ran pretty well last time. He's got some figures going back that make him a player in here, and there could be some pace in this race for him to close into. And I also would use Seafoam, like you were saying. You made all the points about him that I would have made. He's a horse that might be able to take a step forward from 3 to 4, and he's got all that experience in tougher races. So I would use all of them and kind of take a stand against the lightly raced horses, but it's a wide open race. There's a lot going on. I don't know if is that everything you wanted to say about Aqueduct's card? I don't know if you have like a best bet in the first 4 races.
We covered, I think, all the really interesting races anyway.
Before we move on from Aqueduct's card, I just want to answer a few questions that we got about these races. We got 2 questions about Hoffa's Union, who we touched upon. Bill Pfeiffer asked if it's ambitious of Mark Casse to spot Hoffa's Union in a race like the Wood Memorial off a maiden win. How would you answer that?
It's ambitious and it isn't. They just paid a lot of money for this horse. Where are they going to run him? They're going to run him in races like this and see if they have a Derby horse on their hands. There's no other place to run this horse. So they're just going to see what happens. Listen, he ran a fast race first time out and he won impressively. I just, personally happened not to be blown away by it. And he is not for me in this race, but I'm not going to fall off my chair if he runs one.
I feel the same way. I think given some of the results that we've seen in these Derby preps, there's no reason not to take a shot, especially in a race like the Wood, where there's no clear standout. It's not like Game Winners running in the Wood, where you'd want to duck a horse like him. I mean, it didn't work out for Hidden Scroll, but it did work out for By My Standards coming off a maiden win, so why not? I'm not going to pick him in that race. He's not a horse I'm interested in, like you were saying, but I don't think it's overly ambitious to run a horse like that in the Wood. Another question we have is about the Bluegrass, which I think is a good segue to close out the show by mentioning the 2 other 3-year-old prep races that are taking place on Saturday at Keeneland and Santa Anita. The question is, are either of you buying that Some Like It Hot Brown can transfer his form to dirt in the Bluegrass? I'm not. Some Like It Hot Brown is a horse that doesn't really interest me in that race, especially because there is plenty of speed in the Bluegrass, and maybe he'll wind up on the lead. I don't know about that because there are some horses to the outside, including that horse from Duane Lucas that seems pretty fast. And regardless of pace situations, I just feel like Some Like It Hot Brown's a turf horse. He's not a horse that really interested me in the Bluegrass, but the Bluegrass is a really interesting betting race. It's a totally wide open affair, especially if you're going to take a shot against Vekoma. Mike, did you have any feelings on the Bluegrass that you wanted to discuss?
I mean, I do want to take a shot against Vekoma, not because I don't think he's a good horse, just mostly because I'm not convinced he wants to go very far. I wonder if distance ultimately gets him. But I do think he's a really good horse, and I do think he's the horse to beat in here. I don't have a big opinion. I sort of wanted to let you talk about this race because I know you have an interesting horse you like. I picked the 6 Dream Maker on top, only because, when I went back and watched the Tampa Bay Derby, obviously it was a disaster for him, but I don't think he ran as poorly as it looks. He had a lot of trouble in that race. He never looked comfortable. I think he is that kind of horse where you can't get him too far back and too far behind horses. He doesn't like racing in that position. He likes to be clear, like he was 2 starts back when he won pretty impressively. I'm going to give him a chance to rebound in here. I don't love him. I just, I wanted somebody at a price, and I feel like there's a chance he's a price this time.
I mean, I just want to commend you for sticking with Dream Maker because I loved this horse in the Tampa Bay Derby. I thought he made a ton of sense in that race, and I don't know. We saw some bad antics out of him as a 2-year-old, and to me, he looked worse than we had ever seen as a 2-year-old in the Tampa Bay Derby. He was just a mess in that race. I agree with you. His best performance puts him right in the mix in this Bluegrass, and I wouldn't leave him out completely because I don't want to just totally write off a horse that I had an opinion on as recently as 1 race ago. But I'm a little bit scared of him handling this large crowded field, given what we saw out of him last time. But I don't want to really knock any prices in this race because there are so many ways to go. Like I was saying, I don't totally trust Vekoma to get the distance. He's the most talented horse. I don't think there's any disputing that. I just don't think he's really a Derby horse, and the 1 1/8 may prove to be too far for him. Of the horses coming out of the Tampa Bay Derby, Win didn't do that much for me. I know he ran okay and he was wide throughout, and maybe with ground loss he would have finished closer. I'm just starting to get the sense that that Pasco speed figure may be a little bit inflated, and he might not be as highly rated as some people had him out of this race. And the mile and eighth for him is also a major question mark. I just wasn't enamored with him at another short price. If I was going to take anybody out of the Tampa Bay Derby, I'd be most interested in Sir Winston. He's just a deep closer. He's going to be picking up pieces at the end of this race, but I thought he was more likely to do so than a horse like Win Win Win. But the horse that I ended up taking on top in the Bluegrass is the number 14 Aquedini. He's a horse that I'm betting to improve, kind of like Final Jeopardy in the Wood, but I think this is the time of year to do it, and this is the three-year-old class to do it in, because none of these horses have really cemented themselves as being that formidable. I don't love the post position. That's a major obstacle, but this horse, if you watch the last two races, has a tendency to break very sharply. So if Corey Lanerie can get him out of the gate as quickly as he has in his prior races, I think he can get over and get some position, because he does have a lot of closers drawn inside of him. I just like his last two races from a visual perspective. He was really powerful in that maiden win two back, wasn't beating a tough field. I just liked the way he did it. And then last time out, that Fairgrounds track favored closers a little bit. The horse that beat him, Courtyard, is actually decent. And I just thought Aquedini went for home a little bit too soon in that race, opened up a big lead at the quarter pole and just got a bit leg weary late, but he had a right to. The fractions of that race are color-coded red and time form USPPs, indicating the pace was fast. He's got to improve again, but I love his pedigree for the distance. On the dam side, he's bred to get every bit of a mile and a quarter. He's just got this beautiful stride on him, and I think he's a horse with real ability. We'll just see if they're asking too much too soon of him. But Dallas Stewart, he can surprise with a long shot in a big race. So I'm not going to be afraid to take a shot with a big price with Aquedini in the Bluegrass. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Mike.
No, I saw his last two races too. I do like, there are things to like about this horse. Obviously, they're taking a little bit of a shot here. Maybe he'd be more interested if he drew a better post, but he certainly did run well in his last two starts.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't really have anything to say about the Santa Anita Derby. Personally, I'm not trying to be game winner. I just think that's his race to lose. I don't really buy the hype around Roadster, and I think Instagram doesn't want to go this far. But nothing clever for me in the Santa Anita Derby.
Yeah, it's true. Roadster, he's interesting, but if I was taking somebody out of his last race, I'd take No Low Contesto and not him. Game winner, I don't really have any knocks on him. I can't find anybody who really agrees with me. I feel like he hung last time a little bit, but he wants to go this far. I suspect he takes a step forward off of his seasonal debut, and if he does, he probably wins. And if I don't, I think if he loses, then No Low Contesto beats him.
Yeah, for me, it was all 6-3. I just kind of wanted to take a shot against those two challengers and use No Low Contesto underneath, though I think I couldn't quite make a case for him beating Game Winner, because I thought Game Winner did run pretty well in the Rebel last time. He did hang a little bit, but he's just way the horse to beat in this race. So we're pretty much on the same page there. Well, that's all the time we have for today. It's been just over an hour. Mike, I really enjoyed discussing these races with you. If you want further analysis from the Aqueduct card or any of the other stakes action on Saturday, just make sure to navigate to video.drf.com, where you can find all of the excellent stake previews that Mike does each week with Dan Illman as well as Matt Bernier, and the wealth of other video content that's posted every week on drf.com. And you can also check back later today to access an archive of this broadcast. So thanks again, everybody, for listening to this Wood Memorial Day webinar presented by Naira Bets.